Back in the 13th century, the largest and most terrifying war machine the world had ever seen set its sights on a new prize, the island nation of Japan. From his dazzling courts in Xanadu, the great Kublai Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan, ruled a colossal empire stretching from the Pacific to the mountains of Europe. He had crushed the mighty Song dynasty in China and brought Korea to heel. No kingdom had ever successfully defied the Mongol horde. And yet, one island nation refused to bow. His demands for submission were met with a cold, defiant silence. For Kublai Khan, this was an intolerable gap in his dominion, and the solution was simple: build a fleet and force Japan to its knees. The very idea of 100 samurai defeating 10,000 Mongols sounds like a myth, and in a literal sense it is. There wasn't one single battle where those exact numbers clashed. But that legend represents a deeper truth about one of history's most incredible military upsets. In the 13th century, the fate of Japan truly hung by a thread, with a handful of warriors standing against a seemingly unstoppable invading force. Outnumbered and outgunned, how did they manage to defy impossible odds and save their nation? What happened next would become a legendary clash of empires that would shake the Mongol war machine to its core. To get a sense of just how impossible this felt, you have to understand the two worlds about to collide. The Mongol Empire wasn't just an army, it was a force of nature. Forged on the brutal steppes of Central Asia, its warriors were masters of coordinated warfare. They were born in the saddle, trained as horse archers from childhood, and they could unleash perfectly synchronized waves of arrows from composite bows that far outranged anything the Japanese had. Their commanders used a complex system of drums and gongs to maneuver thousands of men like a single deadly organism. And they didn't just bring numbers. They brought technology Japan had never seen, including gunpowder bombs, black shells that exploded with fire, shrapnel, and a terrifying noise that panicked both men and horses. Their army was a ruthlessly efficient engine of conquest that had steamrolled everyone in its path. On the other side stood the samurai. Japan was a beautiful, isolated world steeped in tradition. Real power didn't belong to the emperor, but to the Kamakura shogunate, a military government led by the unyielding regent Hojo Tokimune. The samurai themselves were a proud warrior class, bound by a code that prized personal honor and bravery above all else. And their way of war couldn't have been more different from the Mongols' cold, collective strategy. For a samurai, combat was deeply personal, almost a sacred ritual. Battles often started with special whistling arrows, followed by warriors riding out to announce their name and lineage, challenging an opponent of equal rank to a one-on-one duel. It was a theater of individual glory. They fought with bow and blade, wore heavy, ornate armor, and collected the heads of their foes as proof of their valor. But they had only ever fought other samurai. They were about to get a brutal awakening on the beaches of Kyushu. In the autumn of 1274, the first Mongol invasion fleet appeared. It was a massive force, around 900 ships carrying an army of nearly 30,000 soldiers. The fleet first descended on the small island of Tsushima, a strategic stepping stone to the mainland. The island's governor, Sukakuni, gathered what forces he could, about 80 mounted samurai and their retainers. It was a suicidal number, but they had no intention of surrendering. As the Mongols swarmed ashore, one samurai rode forward to fire a signal arrow and issue a traditional challenge. The Mongols just laughed and answered with a storm of arrows that cut him down before he could finish. In that instant, the defenders of Tsushima understood this wasn't a battle for honor. It was a battle for survival. Sukakuni ordered a desperate charge straight into the Mongol lines. His men fought with a ferocity that shocked the invaders, but they were simply swallowed by the sheer numbers. By nightfall, Sukakuni and nearly all his warriors were dead. The Mongols then moved on to Iki Island with the same brutal results, before finally landing at Hakata Bay on the mainland. Here, the main samurai armies were waiting, but they were still totally unprepared for the Mongol way of war. As samurai charged forward looking for individual duels, they were met by disciplined phalanxes of soldiers who advanced behind a wall of shields, cutting the isolated Japanese warriors down in groups. The air filled with the terrifying explosions of gunpowder bombs and the clang of Mongol gongs. Despite their incredible courage, the samurai were being pushed back. By nightfall, it looked like Japan was on the verge of collapse. The battered defenders retreated, expecting a final crushing assault at dawn. But that assault never came. The Mongol generals, perhaps worried about their long supply lines and the fierce, chaotic resistance, ordered their troops back to the ships to regroup. It was a fatal mistake. During the night, the weather turned, and a ferocious typhoon roared into Hakata Bay. The fleet, anchored in the open, was helpless. Ships were smashed against each other and thrown against the rocks. When the sun rose, the Japanese looked out on a sea of wreckage. The Mongol fleet had suffered heavy losses, forcing the survivors to limp back home in retreat. To the samurai, it was a miracle. They believed the gods had saved them, and they called the storm a divine wind, a kamikaze. The first invasion was a brutal shock, but it was also the wake-up call Japan needed. The myth of Mongol invincibility was broken. Regent Hoshija Tokumun knew Kublai Khan would be back, and he would be furious. When the Khan sent new envoys in 1275, Tokumun had them all publicly executed. It was an astonishing act of defiance. There would be no more talking. Only war. Japan spent the next 7 years preparing. The shogunate ordered the construction of a massive stone wall, the Genko-borui, stretching for 13 miles along the coast of Hakata Bay. This wall, about 2 meters high, was designed to stop the Mongol cavalry from ever storming the beaches again. Samurai from all over the country were mobilized, and they adapted their tactics, learning to fight as coordinated units. Smiths even forged new, thicker swords designed not to chip against the tough Mongol armor. They didn't have to wait long. In 1281, Kublai Khan launched his second invasion, and this time he wasn't taking any chances. It was one of the largest naval forces in history, a two-pronged attack from Korea and southern China, with a combined force likely exceeding 100,000 men and thousands of ships. Waiting for them were an estimated 40,000 Japanese defenders. When the first fleet arrived in June, they found the Great Wall at Hakata Bay waiting for them. It worked perfectly. Unable to land their horses and establish a beachhead, the Mongols were stuck on their ships, where they became perfect targets. The samurai had learned their lesson. Under the cover of darkness, they launched daring raids in small boats, sneaking up on the huge warships, boarding them to set fires and cause chaos, then melting back into the night. For weeks, the invasion ground to a halt. The Mongols couldn't land, and the Japanese couldn't drive them away. The massive invasion force was trapped at sea, their supplies dwindling as they waited for the second fleet to arrive. The massive southern fleet finally arrived in early August, and the combined armada prepared for one last overwhelming assault. The horizon was a literal forest of masts. For the Japanese defenders on the shore, this must have looked like the end. They had held on for 2 months with sheer grit, but now the full might of the Mongol Empire was about to crash down on them. And then on August 15th, the sky turned dark. The wind began to howl. A second, even more powerful typhoon was bearing down on them. The Mongol fleet, a mix of hastily built ships and flat-bottomed riverboats completely unsuited for the ocean, was caught in the open water. For 2 days, the storm raged, tossing the ships like toys, smashing them into each other in a whirlwind of chaos. When it was over, the sight was apocalyptic. Hakata Bay was a graveyard of splintered wood and broken masts. The once unstoppable Mongol armada had been annihilated. Thousands of the invaders drowned. The few who washed ashore were hunted down by the samurai. Only a tiny fraction of the Khan's grand army ever saw home again. Once again, the Japanese called it Kamikaze, divine wind. They believed their gods had saved them. And while modern historians point to the brilliant defensive wall, the samurai's tenacious raids, and the Mongols' own logistical failures as crucial factors, there's no denying the storm was the final, devastating blow. The samurai's courage held the line just long enough for nature to deliver the verdict. The legend of 100 samurai defeating 10,000 Mongols isn't about a literal battle, it's as a powerful symbol of a vastly outnumbered nation that, through tactical genius, sheer will, and a dose of incredible luck, did the impossible. The incredible story of the Mongol invasions shows how strategy, adaptation, and maybe a little help from Mother Nature can defy even the most impossible odds. This event didn't just save Japan. It shaped its identity for centuries. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as we do, make sure to like and subscribe for more epic history, and let us know in the comments. What do you think was the biggest factor in the Mongols' defeat? The failure of both invasions was a stunning turning point. The Mongol Empire, which had seemed invincible, was finally stopped in its tracks. The enormous cost in men and ships weakened Kublai Khan's reign and sparked unrest across his empire. He would plan a third invasion, but it never came to be. Japan remained unconquered. For Japan, the victory was costly. The shogunate struggled to reward the thousands of samurai who had fought, which led to years of internal conflict. But the legacy of their stand was immeasurable. The idea of the kamikaze, the divine wind, became woven into the fabric of Japanese identity, a symbol of the nation's resilience and divine protection. The samurai who fought and died to defend their home became legends. Their story is a timeless testament to the idea that the strength of a nation isn't just in its numbers, but in its spirit.